Recording in progress. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Renee Garrett, and I'm your Speech Therapy PD podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Before we get started, we have a few things to tell you about. Each episode is 60 minutes and will be offered for zero point 0.1 ASHA CEU. If you're joining us for this live episode and your state license requires live CEUs, please be sure to complete all course modules before the end of the day on your Speech Therapy PD account, including the one that says complete course. Here are the disclosures. Megan McCue is the author of Iatrogenic Botulism 101 and receives income from its sales on Amazon. Her participation in this podcast is intended to share her personal experience and to educate clinicians about the adverse effects of botulinum toxin. She has no relevant non-financial relationships to disclose. I'm the founder and owner of BrainBridge Connect LLC, and as the host of this podcast, I receive financial reimbursement from Speech Therapy PD for this and other presentations. I am also the secretary and president-elect of the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Questions can be written in the chat or the Q&A box tonight and will be answered throughout the presentation. Now we welcome our guest, Megan McCue, MS, CCC-SLP, who is a California-based home health speech-language pathologist and the author of Iatrogenic Botulism 101, a guide for doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers. She's passionate about working with adults with neurodegenerative diseases and raising awareness among clinicians about the often overlooked adverse effects of botulinum toxin injections. That is a big word, so bear with me. Megan, welcome and thank you so much for agreeing to this podcast.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, Renee, for having me. And yes, it is a mouthful. So we will. But yes, botulinum toxin is quite a mouthful, but I'm very passionate about this topic and I'm really excited to share with other clinicians my own experience having gone through adverse effects related to these injections, and then what I ended up learning after diving into all the research on some of these effects and the illness that can come from these injections. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. One of the things, and I should have mentioned this before, so it's not a question you're comfortable answering. I typically start by asking people kind of how they came into the field of SLP or whatever their profession is, because I find that human connection really helps us. Um, not only just have the connection, but it's interesting to hear other people's stories. So is that something you're comfortable sharing?
Sure, yeah. I was always one of those people who wanted to work with kids. I babysat my whole life, ended up actually in high school working with the special needs classrooms. I always thought I'd work in the schools with kids, and I did do that when I first graduated as a speech pathologist. But then when I had my own kids, I was like, I don't think I have the energy to do this all day long. And I really felt like
Fair.
I'm going to need to figure something else out. And luckily, I had a good friend from grad school who was working in a SNF at the time. And I said, hey, can I just like shadow you while I'm on maternity leave? And she was so kind and let me ask her a bazillion questions. I took a ton of continuing ed, there weren't as many podcasts back then, but I was really committed to the transition. And I ended up starting out in home health because it was a little less intimidating than acute care, right? I had never done an MVSS in my life. And I loved home health so much that I never left. And now I just consider myself like a home health expert. Like, don't put me in a hospital, don't even put me in a SNF. I just want to be in people's homes, getting
Mhm.
to know them, what's important to them, what are we going to focus on functionally. So that's what I've been doing for the past 9 years since I had my own baby.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've done acute care, and actually that's where I spent the majority of my career, which is terrifying because dysphagia was the one thing I didn't want to do, and that's what I spent most of my career
Story.
doing.
Exactly. That's most of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I
So
definitely
let
got a schooling on dysphagia once I, developed these adverse effects. So if you want, I can just jump right into that. Go ahead. You were going to
uh,
ask me a
oh
question.
yeah, no. Well, and I think home health is such a mixed bag of what are you walking into, because I did some some consultative work here and worked a lot with the Medicaid waiver population. And, um, a lot of our folks live in group homes or not necessarily the biological family setting. And it was very eye-opening to see because dysphagia is not, we think it's well known in our field, but it's not well known in other places. So you see a lot of that. So hats off to our home health colleagues because that's some in the trenches stuff right there.
Oh yes, we are never short of stories. I'll tell you that much. It's never a dull moment in home health. Kind of the
Yeah.
Wild West.
Yeah. Getting access to medical records. We'll pause it there and dot dot dot.
All the rest. Yep.
Yeah, so let's jump right in and talk about you know, the botulinum toxin, just like what the mechanism behind it. You know, we'll kind of start there, I think, and maybe talk about your story because I think that's the thing that people are really the most interested in is what is the mechanism there? Because I think we all know um, kind of that background of it, rat poison or it's a
Yeah.
paralytic. I think most
Mm-hmm.
people know those general things, but what is really kind of the backstory? And if you want to jump right into your story, I would love to know more about that.
Yeah. So let me start by describing what botulinum toxin is. And it's worse than rat poison. It's actually the most lethal poison on the planet. And the toxin is a protein that grows on bacteria. What the bacteria is called Clostridium botulinum. So back in the day when someone didn't properly can foods, like if they didn't heat the foods up enough before canning it, this toxin could actually grow on top of the food. And that was how people were getting what's called botulism. That is the illness that this toxin can cause when it gets into the body and then into the nervous system. It's a nervous system illness. So what the toxin is doing when it gets into the body is it is uh, being taken up into the nervous system and it is blocking neurotransmitter communication at the nerve synapse. So I had to learn a lot of this stuff too when I became ill. So I'm gonna go slow for some of those SLPs who didn't pay attention in neurobiology like me. But basically we eat the toxin back in the days. Nowadays we're injecting it, and if it spreads into the nervous system, it can get into the autonomic nervous system. That is the part of our nervous system that runs on acetylcholine, which is that neurotransmitter that botulinum toxin can block. So it's really great when it stays in our muscle, right? Because then we get those smooth foreheads that don't move because the toxin is
Uh,
blocking
not
that
this
muscle
one,
movement.
not this
Nope,
one.
not this one either. That's okay. Join the club. Acetylcholine is that neurotransmitter, that chemical that is telling your muscles to move. So when the toxin blocks that at the nerve to muscle synapse, you end up with paralysis or weakness, severe weakness or paralysis. Um, the issue comes so for actually, for years there was botulism, foodborne botulism, but then in the 70s, doctors started playing around with, hey, maybe we could use this for medical conditions like muscle spasms or muscle spasticity when the muscles are too tight because it can release and relax. So there were a couple of doctors that played around with this in the lab, and Alan Scott is the ophthalmologist who originally used it to treat like strabismus, the lazy
Hmm.
eyes, and eye spasms. Um, Blepharospasm is what it's called when the eyelids blink. So he was the original one to start injecting this toxin into humans. And one of the most interesting things I learned when I was doing my research for one of my books was that he inoculated himself. He got the vaccine from the army because, of course, this had been a bioweapon. This was a
Hmm.
bioweapon that militaries were studying, our own military included. So he got the vaccine from the US Army because he was like, I don't want that thing in my body if it goes wrong, right? If the needle ends up, poking him or whatever. I just thought that was an interesting tidbit. I was like, wasn't willing to try it himself. But he went on to inject it in people's eyes. At the time, this was back in the 70s, they did know on initial trials that it had the ability to spread. So it could spread about 3 to 4 centimeters away from the injection point into adjacent muscle tissue. So we've known since the 70s that that could happen. And then once the toxin became more and more commercialized, it did get approved for FDA approval in the late 90s, or I'm sorry, 1989 for medical reasons. That's when the adverse effects started showing up on more clinical trials and in the FDA's adverse event database. So that's when the manufacturers were starting to see that this toxin had the ability to cause botulism symptoms if it spread from the injection point. And it can do that one of 3 ways. And I'll go through my story once I explain how it can spread, and I'll tell you what happened in my case. So the toxin, of course, I just mentioned, can spread through adjacent muscle tissue, but there's actually 2 other ways it can spread if it does spread. And the second way is accidental injection into a blood vessel. These, the cosmetic injectors, many of the neurologists that are injecting this are not necessarily using imaging. Thankfully, a lot of our patients with spasmodic dysphonia, cricopharyngeal spasms or esophageal spasms are getting imaging, of course, because they're being injected into their larynx, right? A lot could go wrong if that goes into the wrong place. So thankfully, some patients are getting imaging, but many are not, right? And certainly not cosmetic patients are not getting imaging. So accidental injection into a blood vessel actually happens a lot more frequently than you would think. You don't often see providers like pulling back out to see if they're in a blood vessel, aspirating the needle. I do believe that's what happened in my case, and I'll explain why. But real quick, the third way that the toxin can spread, and this has only come to light in the past 14 years or so, microbiologist researchers realized in animal models that the toxin can hop back along nerve cells from the injection point. So if it is injected, into the forehead, into the neck, wherever, it actually has the capability of getting into the central nervous system, which is pretty scary. These papers are just like quietly sitting on Google Scholar. I'm like, where are the alarm bells? But I'll talk at the end about efforts and social media efforts to raise awareness about this. But this is microbiology research. It's heavy. It's not something that a layperson is going to find or read through. And I was lucky to have a patient whose son was a PhD in microbiology, and he walked me through a lot of this stuff when I got sick. Once in the central nervous system, botulinum toxin is not just specific to blocking acetylcholine. It can actually block even more neurotransmitters, such as dopamine. That's a big one we all know, right? Glutamate, that is the major excitatory neurotransmitter, a big deal, right? For memory and word finding and all of these cognitive functions. GABA is what comes from glutamate. So all of these neurotransmitters in the central nervous system can be disrupted by toxin. And it doesn't even necessarily have to come from accidental injection in the blood vessel, like what was the case in my situation. This toxin can actually just hop back on its own whenever it wants, which is scary. And the implications are scary. And I'm really not here to fearmonger. I'm here to educate so that people just have all the data and make their own decisions. But
yeah.
And it might be helpful for people to hear what happened to me. So I'll give you guys the 5-minute version, not the 25-minute version, right?
Give us the however long you want to do it version.
Okay. It's a long tail, but basically, I'm 36. My friends were trying Botox. My sister had tried it. And I thought, you know what? I think I want to try a tiny amount. And I had read enough about it to know that it was the toxin that could cause botulism. But everything you read online is, oh my gosh, of course it's safe. Of course, small amounts of this are safe. Don't worry about it. I actually looked my MD straight in the eyes and told her, I don't want to end up with dysphagia. So I want to make sure that's not a possibility here, because I had seen that on the advertisements, in the fine print in her office. And I just said, okay, that's not like something that I could possibly suffer from, right? And she said, oh my gosh, no way, not at all. She's like, Megan, you're literally getting the tiniest amount I've ever given to one person in a session because I just wanted my little crow's feet, my laugh lines. I like to smile a lot. So she injects me on the left side, totally normal, feels fine, moves over to the right side. And immediately after she injects me, it hurt. Like I felt it more on this right side than I did on the left. And I thought, well, that was interesting. Within minutes, I began developing weird symptoms, brain pressure. I was having difficulty concentrating on the wall in front of me. And this is my first time getting Botox. So I have no reference, right? I'm like, oh, this is probably just normal. Like, of course, you're going to get brain pressure if there's a needle going into your head, right? I'm just thinking, like, this is totally normal. But I did say something. I said to the doctor, oh, wow, I feel really strange. And you could kind of tell she hadn't heard that a lot. She kind of looked up and said, okay, I want you to hang out. I think she thought I was having a vasovagal response, but I wasn't. And I wasn't having an allergic reaction either. I kind of sat there for 15 minutes or so. And while I'm sitting there, I'm just like starting to feel really odd neurological symptoms. I didn't really say much after that. I got in my car and I had a patient. I had a full day of patients that day. So I get to my first patient and all these other symptoms start developing. I start having heart palpitations and a feeling of like extreme fight or flight is the best way to put it. I don't like to say anxiety because that's how a lot of women get written off. So I have
Yeah.
actually learned to say fight or flight
Yeah.
because it wasn't a mental anxiety. I wasn't anxious about anything. I was like, "Oh, I'm getting Botox. This is cool. Like I'm going to have frozen crow's feet." It was truly a physical fight or flight. It was a heart palpitations, a sweating, an inability to concentrate. Meanwhile, I've been doing my job at that point for 7 years. I love my job. It's a patient I've seen a million times. And my body was just screaming, like, go home now. So I got back in the car and I called off the rest of the day. I had a severe headache driving home. It was really hard for me to concentrate. I get home. My mom's watching my 10-month-old. I had a 10-month-old at the time. And I just start like a barrage of symptoms just starts flooding. Like within the next couple of hours, it was dizziness, nausea, felt like I was coming down with COVID, brain fog, fatigue.
Oh my
I'm laying on
gosh.
the couch and I call the doctor back because I'm like, this can't be normal. Like, there's no way this is just a normal reaction. And she again totally wrote me off, said, no, 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 you're anxious. You're very anxious. Go drink some tea. So, and this
Not
is a
the
big,
tea.
I know, right? It's like, really, are we telling women that these days? Go drink tea, honey. Hey,
You're
I love tea though. I will,
hysterical.
I know, I will say I do love tea, but not that day. I was feeling horrible. And it's a really interesting thing, and we'll get into this more, to be so thoroughly gaslit that you actually start gaslighting yourself. And that is what happens to a lot of botulism victims. This is not just people who have adverse reactions to Botox. This is also happening in foodborne botulism because our symptoms are nervous system symptoms. They do not show up on your x-ray. They do not show up on your blood test even. These are symptoms that are, a lot of them are sensory, or, I mean, how do you tell someone, how do you convince someone you have dizziness or blurry vision or difficulty swallowing even when it's more mild? Globus sensation. How could I convince someone of that, right? So within the the ensuing days and weeks, things just got worse and worse. Symptoms would come and go. But by week 5 to 6, I was basically not producing hardly any saliva. Solid foods stopped going down. They would feel just completely stuck right here. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't, like, I literally can't swallow. My brain would look at even like rice, and it was like, no, don't do it. That's not going down. It was a very clear signal that my brain was telling me. I had a constant globus sensation. I was so fatigued. I had stopped working, which I've never done except for maternity leave. Okay. I do not take work off. Like, I'm the kind of person that works like Christmas Eve. I'm a weirdo. Um, I could not work. I had completely stopped working. I was on the couch. I could not care for my children. My husband at the time was taking care of our 3 kids, doing all the grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning. I mean, I was down and out. I was trying to get through every day because I was so fatigued, but then I would have these fight or flight symptoms all day long that were just like, where is this coming from? So my primary care doctor, I finally got in to see her. She tests my gag reflex and it's totally absent. She's like, okay, you're having trouble swallowing. She's like, you're an SLP, aren't you? Like, let's do this. Let's go in for a swallow test. So I said, yeah, I do want that. At that point, I had been to the ER a few times telling them, I don't know what's going on, but Botox happened and then all this other stuff happened. And I don't get it because this stuff isn't necessarily showing up when I'm Googling. Like some of it would, dry mouth would show up and fatigue, but my
Googling.
other
I love it.
symptoms, yeah, yeah,
You're Googling the things.
exactly. You're Googling all the things. Putting it into an AI bot, which funny enough, all the AI bots were like, we think you have botulism. You should go get that checked out. Really, truly, they were putting two and two together. And I ended up having what's called mild botulism. So this is not like Megan's on her deathbed, she can't breathe, and she's paralyzed. That's severe botulism. This
Yeah.
is truly a wide range of symptoms that can occur from these injections and from even from foodborne botulism, depending on how much you eat. Um, Fast forward to my swallow study, the SLP looks at my mouth and she's like, your mouth is really dry. And I said, I know I can't. My pharynx would stop triggering a swallow because there wasn't enough saliva. And it's saying, no, 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 not enough bolus. We're not going to trigger a swallow. I had lost 20 pounds, Renee, in about 2 months. 20 pounds. I had never lost that amount of weight, ever. This was not in my head, me making this up. Everyone around me was very concerned. I had never acted like this before. The problem, of course, is that none of my symptoms showed up on any testing at the hospital. So they really do look at you kind of like you're crazy. And when you're coming in for the fifth time, in the last month. So on my MBSS, it did show that I had esophageal stasis. There was something weird going on with my esophagus. It was just like we couldn't tell if it was like weak or spazzing. It was doing weird stuff because the pudding bolus took like 30 something seconds to get down from my mouth to my stomach. I know. Yeah. And even the SLP was looking at it like, you have esophageal stasis, but here's what she told me. She said, you've probably always had this. You're probably noticing it more now that you're anxious. And in my
Oh
head,
my.
I'm just thinking, Megan, you need to go home. You need to research this right now because no doctor, and this is what's really scary for people that are going through this, no doctor can help us. And there is, okay, I want to say this. There is a treatment for these adverse effects. It is highly regulated by the CDC because this is a known bioweapon, right? The
Yeah.
CDC is they're the only entity that has this antitoxin. It is not at your local hospital. It is up to the discretion of the CDC whether or not you are a candidate. So when I called my state health department, I said, look, I've lost 20 pounds. I cannot swallow solids. I'm living off of smoothies and soups. Please help me. They said, sorry, this is California State Health Department. Sorry, we only give this out to people who are either in active respiratory failure or completely paralyzed head to toe. And I thought, well, there's about 87 things that can go wrong before you get to that point. If you know anything about the swallow, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I went on to meet hundreds and read through thousands of stories of people this had happened to after I joined a support group. And there were women on peg tubes who had been antitoxin, denied antitoxin at the hospital. But their epiglottis was, either completely paralyzed or so weak that aspiration was occurring on all liquid solids. So that is why I'm doing what I'm doing and trying to raise as much awareness because the treatment is so difficult to get. I mean, truly, if you get it, you are so, so lucky. Um, Even the treatment, though, and this is important for SLPs to understand, the treatment antitoxin cannot undo the damage that has already occurred. So once that toxin is taken up into those nerve to nerve synapses that line our entire, autonomic nervous system, the cholinergic pathways, that's done. Like those nerve synapses are permanently damaged. The body will actually, in the ensuing months and years, attempt to regrow new nerve synapses around the ones that have been permanently damaged. So the antitoxin cannot reverse the damage. It can only neutralize any toxin that's left in the bloodstream. So it will prevent further damage, right? But that's really a game of time. Time is of the essence because this toxin gets taken up so rapidly into those nerve to nerve synapses if it gets into our bloodstream or, if it spreads into the brain. So for me, it was another 3 to 6 months of, absolute terrifying nightmare. If I'm being totally honest, it really was the scariest thing I've ever been through. No one physically around me understood what I was going through. Just I had severe insomnia. So when the toxin gets into the autonomic nervous system, it essentially shuts off your parasympathetic and it leaves you in a state of fight or flight almost 24/7. So many of us are not sleeping well. We are, and I'm like I love my tea and my cat. So I always joke, I'm like a grandma already. I'm in bed by 9 o'clock most nights. And I couldn't sleep, Renee. I was laying awake till 3 a.m. and it was like my body physically could not sleep. Um, Ended up finding a support group full of these amazing women I was getting to know who had it was like reading through their stories was literally like reading my own story. It was crazy how similar all of our symptoms were. Many people I met had received it cosmetically, but others had also received it for things like migraines. TMJ pain is a really big one that they're pushing now, and even the dentists are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I want to be really clear about my stance that I'm not saying that Botox doesn't work because it really does work. It works really well, in terms of its action on our nervous system. And everyone has to make that risk benefit analysis, right? So if someone has debilitating migraines, maybe they are willing to take on the risk of the adverse effects. Everyone I've spoken to who did get poisoned from migraine Botox has said, no, I take the migraines back. But, it's again up to the individual, truly. And I just thank my lucky stars too, because I did heal within about 6 to 12 months. When I started doing more research about this, when I started interviewing other people who had been through this and gathering data, I actually put together a poll because I wanted to get more info on what was going on with people's symptoms. There was in the poll I conducted, 30%, just 30% of people who had experienced these swallowing and speaking difficulties after Botox had recovered within 6 months. So
Mm-hmm.
the other 70% had taken 6 months or longer to recover. So, these are not necessarily short-lived symptoms. And that's why I think it's so important that our patients understand kind of what the risks are. And they also understand they probably can't have the treatment if they're only having, let's say they have a paralyzed epiglottis and that's their only symptom, but hey, that's a really big symptom, right? That is a huge symptom, right? But they wouldn't be a candidate for the antitoxin at that point. And they might have to, yes, exactly. That's what's mind blowing. I know. Now you know why I'm so passionate.
It's wild.
Yeah.
This is wild.
I know. And what really struck me too was how little information there was about this. Because I'm over here thinking like, I want to know my prognosis, I want data. I was like typical Virgo SLP. I wanted like all of the answers. And the reality is there is no one size fits all. It is very different for different people. And that's because there's a lot of factors at play, right? Did you have any medical conditions before the Botox? Where did the Botox spread? Did it just stay locally in your muscles? Or did it spread systemically? Did it go to your limbs? Did it go to your swallowing muscles? Did it go to your brain? There's so many different variables happening. And then of course there's other things like age. The younger you are, the more likely your nervous system is to completely regenerate, different variables like that. Um, I was just lucky. I went in very healthy. I went into the injections very healthy. I'm out here in California eating all the eating all the organic farm food and all that.
Love it.
But yes, but I was so lucky. My gosh, I wake up every morning and I say, Megan, you're the luckiest person alive, and you have to use your voice because you can be a voice for the people who weren't as lucky, the people who are still on bed, the people
Hmm.
who haven't been able to return to work, the people who are still on feeding tube from this. And, be the voice, at least educate my fellow SLPs so that we can recognize these symptoms. I really feel like we're in a totally unique position because we could be the clinician that's like, I learned that, if someone's coming in with idiopathic dysphagia or idiopathic dysphonia, maybe I should screen them with that question. Because guess what, guys? Botulinum toxin injections do not show up on MedList. So we get records. We don't have any record of them receiving Botox. A lot of people don't even think to mention it. Certainly not if they're getting it cosmetically, right? Some women actually that I've met are actually embarrassed to tell their stories, which
Hmm.
I really wish they wouldn't be, but they feel ashamed because they feel like, well, if I did it for vanity, it's my own fault. And I say, no, 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 don't feel
No,
that way.
yeah,
This
it
stuff
doesn't
is,
matter.
it doesn't matter. This stuff is totally normalized. And unfortunately, there's a huge disconnect between the reality of what people are going through after these and what they're being told are the possible side effects. So a lot of times you walk into a dermatologist's office or a med spa and you're being told, oh, slight headache, pain at the injection site. That's the most that could ever happen. Toxin spread, there's a black box warning, of course, on all these products that says it can cause botulism, that it can spread. But what we're told as patients is that only happens when it's a huge amount or, an overdose. Well, guess what? I had 12 units once. And it did happen to me in a much more milder version, right? I didn't get the paralyzed epiglottis or other things that people have had to live through. I was very lucky, but I will tell you firsthand that those 12 units did a ton of damage. Yeah, it was just unbelievably scary. I didn't mention that my ears got also damaged in the process. Essentially, they felt like they were full 24/7 for 9 months. Felt like I was getting off of an airplane and I would be sitting with a patient, unplugging my nose. That was my longest lasting symptom. And it does still occur if I don't get enough sleep, if my nervous system, yes. And I'm almost 2 years out. I know Renee's faces. Yes, mind blown.
So many questions and thoughts.
Okay, ask him because I talk too much.
Well, no, so I'm thinking about because I just did a couple of episodes with Jamie Anderson out of South Florida, and they're getting ready to do the University of South Florida Swallowing Symposium, and she does a lot of work with functional dysphagia. And, I've had this conversation privately with her too of all the times that I had, because in acute care, I'd have outpatient modified barium swallow patients come in, and I would get either very limited information or only the information the patient would give me, depending on their cognitive status. And a lot of times, what would happen is they'd come in and they would describe some of the things that you've been describing about their swallowing: globus, stasis, um,
Really effortful swallow.
really
Has
effortful, um, xerostomia, all kinds of other things. And I never asked that question because I just didn't know. But I like talking to her about this other component of functional dysphagia and how we used to term it as a mental health problem, or it's
absolutely.
um oh gosh, what's the word? It starts with a C. Uh and it was
Well,
it's now called
psychosomatic is another word
it's
that they usually
not.
use.
No, it's not that. I have it on the tip of my tongue. It'll come to me eventually.
Okay.
But it's basically functional neurological disorder, or a functional dysphagia, where the patient has described all these symptoms and no one believes them basically because they don't have a structural abnormality, they don't have a physiological impairment, they don't have a neurological condition, degenerative thing, whatever it is.
Right.
Um, and so this sounds so familiar to me because you nailed it when you said this should be a screening question for
Right.
those of us who are completing swallow studies, where we don't always have a complete picture. We get this one shot snapshot of this patient. We're with them for 20 minutes to an hour, if that, when you're in the acute care setting and you have these outpatient slots and people just come in and you're with them for this short amount of time. And we are not, at least I wasn't asking the question because I didn't know that I needed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So
that's,
I
and I
think
always,
that's
yeah,
brilliant.
yes. And I tell people if you take away one thing from this DEU, let it be to just factor that in as a screening question. And oh, we got a chat question. Sorry, that distracted me. Factor it in as a screening question, especially in the case. Now, I'm not saying, you get a stroke patient who just started having dysphagia. That's obvious, right? But in the cases of idiopathic dysphagia, I say please ask that question. Or even dysphonia. Dysphonia is another one that people don't talk about as much, but it did show up in the clinical trials. So it is on the Botox product insert as a possible side effect. In my, how many people had dysphonia? I'm looking at the data from it was 57% had experienced dysphonia. Now, this is in a pool of people who were experiencing side effects. This isn't like, 60% of people who do Botox will get dysphonia. No, 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 no. It's probably much closer to like 1%. But
Hmm.
this was a group of people who had already developed adverse effects. So dysphonia, hoarse voice, articulation difficulties, and honestly, the symptom that came up the most in the people I polled was cognitive impairment,
Hmm.
brain fog, short-term memory loss, scattered and disorganized thinking. Those were
Hmm.
big ones that honestly, if those were your only symptoms from Botox, would you ever put two and two together? Like, I think
No.
you would just be like, I'm getting old. I'm in menopause, all these things. And of course, those things can happen without Botox. We know that. But I really wonder at this point, how many people are walking around with some of these adverse effects and they are not ever putting two and two together. They're even going to a swallow test at an outpatient place and no one's asking them about the Botox because we didn't know, right? Until
Yeah.
you did the CEU.
Yeah.
And so things are getting missed. And that's what keeps me up at night is, oh gosh, these people that get missed, do they go back and get more Botox? Because another thing we know for sure is that if you start having adverse effects, you should not re-inject because it tells you that the toxin has likely spread. Um, those nerve synapses may have all been used up in the areas where you've been getting Botox, if it's long term that you've been using it. It is very, very risky to re-inject. The Botox product insert even says to injectors, do not inject anyone who has had side effects from this product. It's very dangerous because of the way the toxin works. It can like multiply even, I forget what they call it. It's like a compounding effect where it can
Hmm.
be worse and worse and worse with each subsequent injection.
Yeah. So it came to me, conversion disorder. We used to call it conversion
Conversion.
disorder. And so in talking to Jamie and then also Dr. Renee Utansky, I think I say her name right, maybe not. Um, at the Rochester Mayo Clinic, she does a lot with functional neuro disorders and functional speech disorders. And it's very interesting because the way that I was taught, like early in my career, is that if it's conversion disorder, you treat it like it's the disorder, and then it'll come to the person that they really don't have a problem. And that's typically not been my experience. But thinking about how this could be perceived as a functional dysphagia,
Mhm.
um, that maybe we're not tapping into because, again, we don't know. We haven't seen that in their medical history. Maybe they did go to the dentist or they went to their dermatologist and it's not in their mainstream EHR,
Right.
it's because, we like to think that all of our medical records are connected, but they're not. My dentist isn't connected to my PCP, and not unless they
Totally.
reached out. So, um,
Totally. And one of the things that's happening with more mild to moderate botulism is what I had considered very mild. It's not just motor nerves that
mhm.
can be affected, okay? It's also sensory neurons. And
Yeah,
when that toxin disrupts the vagus nerve, you can get all kinds of weird sensations. You are having to do a very effortful swallow. You feel like you have globus 24/7. And the craziest thing I learned, Renee, when I was doing research for one of my books, is I read a book about foodborne botulism cases back from like the 1920s. They had all my same swallowing symptoms. It was like patients described, doctors would write meticulous notes back then. It was amazing. Like
yeah.
they would write down everything because they were trying to figure out this illness. They said patients describe feeling like there is something in their throat that's like there's a shelf in their throat that food can't pass through, but it's not painful. And I was like, Globus. I was like, that is literally what I had. And this was matching up with what like girls who ate bad canned green beans were eating in 1914 or whatever. It was like mind blowing. A lot of these people were getting written off as anxious. They were being sent to psychiatric facilities because doctors
Hysteria.
did not believe them.
Hmm.
It's mind blowing when you start peeling back the layers. And, you know,
Especially being female.
well, it's true. We hate to say it, but I have what's really crazy about this is so I went on to I did what every SLP would do, Renee. I was like, I got to know everything about this. I self-published 4 books, all of which are free on my website. So we'll link that in the show notes. But I also started a podcast so that I could interview other people this had happened to and really start getting even more stories. And I have interviewed a few men, and even they often aren't believed. And it's like,
Yeah.
I literally just came from my Botox appointment and I feel like I can't breathe. And the Botox
Hmm.
commercial is like, hey, if you can't breathe, you go to the hospital, right? If you can't breathe or if you can't swallow, that's what the Botox commercial says is go to the hospital. But
And you
when we
should get the
do
antitoxin, but yet you don't.
that, exactly. And one of the happiest days of my life, because I started like doing a lot more advocacy work on social media about this, a woman somehow found my page. Her injector was denying her, saying you're anxious. Her, I forget, oh, she went into the ER. She drove 2 hours because she lived in rural New Mexico. She drove 2 hours to the ER. They completely denied her. She was having progressive paralysis and muscle weakness and respiratory distress. She finally went to her PCP, who believed her. She had to drive to a different state. She had to drive to Texas, but she did get the antitoxin. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And it was just like such a relief because you really, you talk to these people on the phone and you're just like, you're, 8 days out or whatever it is. And you want to scream at, a doctor on the other line, please get her antitoxin. It's going to help. Um, and thankfully, the doctor who saw her ended up doing a case study. So we now have a new case study in the literature. Because I live on those, and I also gobble up anything I can find about botulism. Because foodborne and iatrogenic are, it's the same core set of symptoms. Foodborne tends to be more severe. Iatrogenic can be much more mild, like mine, depending on how much toxin spread. Um, Someone in the chat said, do you think it's associated with parotitis? And
Hmm.
I don't know what they mean by it, but if they're talking about the dry mouth, or because
Like,
actually that can happen if the
yeah.
toxin gets into the parotid glands, it won't swell them, but it will dry up saliva. And they do this with patients with Parkinson's or patients,
Hmm.
they actually, this blows my mind. They have done it in the NICU with babies who are
Hmm.
secreting. They have actually given them Botox in their cheeks. That scares me a lot for a lot of reasons, but it's to dry up the saliva so that they
Yeah.
hopefully don't aspirate on their secretion. But so maybe am I getting your question right, Heather? Because maybe she could clarify it. But for
Yeah,
me,
no.
the dry mouth, this is fascinating. Yeah. Yes. Oh, okay. So someone has a friend who's getting Botox for migraines and is complaining about globus. Yes, that was my biggest symptom in addition to the dry mouth. My dry mouth was caused by autonomic nervous system disruption.
Mm-hmm.
So when the autonomic nervous system is disrupted, we can have issues with heartbeat. So a lot of people will get the heart palpitations like I did, the fight or flight symptoms. Digestion can be paralyzed. People actually, this is TMI, but I would be constipated for a week. I just wouldn't go for a week. It would finally happen, then another week. I mean, this happens a
That's
lot.
alarming.
Yeah, exactly. That lasted about 3 months, but a lot of people get UTIs just because things are just not moving in the way that they should because that autonomic component is being
Yeah.
disrupted. Digestion, all of that, um, all of the
I've had
swallowing muscles.
and
Go
I've
ahead.
had some friends who had the Botox injections for migraines and they get bruising and
Yeah.
they will say it like I've never had this before and this is like my fourth time or my fifth time and then they come in and they have I mean it's like they get a bruise up here a couple times I've seen them like they had a black eye and it's
Mhm.
not a slight like little boop, like when you
Yeah.
get a bad blood draw and you get a little,
Well,
it's
well,
like a
right.
full blown, almost looks like a full blown hematoma.
The um the chronic migraine Botox protocol is 39 different injections around the skull.
Uh-huh.
So I now run a support group for people who have these adverse effects. And I will say that the people who get it for migraines tend to have the most severe adverse effects
Mhm.
when it happens, just because of look at how
The
close we are to
volume.
everything
Yeah.
in the brain and the volume. It's 155 to 195 units. I had 12 for comparison, so it's
And it's
10
hitting all the
more.
cranial nerves.
It's all right there.
Yeah.
Um, a woman I interviewed on my podcast that's coming out this week, she, bless her heart, she is amazing and strong. Her story went viral while she was in the ICU. So she did get the antitoxin. She was a migraine patient. She was in like People magazine and everything, and she hates how she looked at the point because her literal neck muscles could not hold up her head. They were so weak. So she was in a neck brace and everything. She was on a peg tube for 3 months, I think. Thank goodness she received the antitoxin and she's doing so much better now. She's 2 years out. She will tell you though, she's not the same that she was before Botox. And a lot of people say that. Um, Botulism has a weird, incorrect reputation for only lasting like 3 to 6 months. That's kind of what they say if you just Google it. No, when you start digging into the long-term research that researchers in the 80s did after a foodborne outbreak, some of the recent iatrogenic botulism research has shown years out from poisoning. People continue to have a relapse of symptoms or continue to struggle with things like muscle weakness. They never get back to their exercise routines. They have fatigue. Vision impairments tend to be one of the longest lasting symptoms, and those are quite prevalent after any kind of Botox. It's actually crazy. I was reading one of the product inserts, and vision impairments were happening at rates of like 1 to 5% for cosmetic
Hmm.
injections. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. Like when we're talking about millions of people every year, 1 to 5% adds up quick. And thankfully, there is more and more awareness about
Hmm.
these adverse effects and this illness growing, especially with social media. Think about back in 2000, if you had been injured. I don't even think there was an online system to report your side effects, to the FDA, let alone awareness about this and a microphone like social media is, or
Hmm.
podcasts, all these alternative media ways that we can get this out. And one thing I learned, not to be too conspiratorial, but one thing I learned when I was researching was that the company that made this product, their name was Allergan, back when they were sued multiple times because people had these adverse effects, and some people were like, "I'm suing," and I'm glad they did because some of the discovery documents showed that this company did know they were giving people botulism, and the FDA knew about it too back in the early 2000s. And they were kind of trying to sweep it under a rug, but then the FDA was finally like, okay, no, like you got to put the black box warning on, like you got to tell people about this because people are dying. You can die from cardiac arrest or respiratory
Mm-hmm.
failure or aspiration pneumonia. Those are the three most common ways. And they found out through the discovery documents that the company had actually been hiring third-party data companies to rewrite the number of botulism reports they were receiving and basically like decrease the amount by 90%. So again, pharma, you know, they have great drugs, they have not so great drugs. The goal is not to bash all of pharma. The goal is just informed consent, informed
Yeah.
consent, informed consent. Like patients must know what's going on. And if you suspect that one of your patients might be going through some of these adverse effects, one of the things I do, because I don't want to like, you should go to my website and read all my books, right? I'm not going to do that to my patient. One of the things I tell them is, hey, have you ever just been to the drugs.com page for Botox? That's a really great way to just dip their toes in, has really good list of the possible side effects. And it's
Mm-hmm.
all from the clinical trials from the manufacturer. It's not like stuff they just made up, right? This is real data from placebo-controlled trials. So patients can kind of start there and then maybe start to ask their injector, or they should be asking their injector and reporting those symptoms to their injector so that ultimately there can be more awareness. We can be reporting these symptoms to the appropriate, in the US, it's the FDA, so that they have accurate data on all of these adverse effects. It's really important that people understand not only that these can happen from licensed and experienced injectors at small doses, but also that if these side effects happen, we don't know how long they will last. The hope is 3 to 6 months, but it's truly like Russian roulette. Like some women, like me, so lucky, right? And now I can speak out about this. Other women, not so lucky, going on 2 to 3 years out and still suffering from any number of these things: vision impairments, muscle weakness, fatigue, dysphagia. So, what drug
And
website? Yes,
yeah,
drugs.com. That's
yeah,
just
and
generic. Yeah.
yeah, I was
Go
gonna say before we get to the questions, I wanted to
ahead.
just, and you mentioned a little bit of the screening question. Is there anything else assessment or documentation wise? Um, who would you reach out to as an SLP as far as interprofessionally or multidisciplinary teammates? Because I want to make sure we cover that before we get to the questions, because the questions are important. I think Heather's story is a good one that we need to
Address.
talk
Okay.
about.
You don't need to do anything special in terms of assessment. Still assess your patients normally like you would. Ask that screening question. Have you received botulinum toxin injections in the past month? I always say month because these side effects, my swallowing difficulties didn't come on until 5 to 6 weeks later because it was a slow progression. Make sure to do your cranial nerve exam. For example, my gag reflex was totally absent, right? I never would have known that if my primary care doctor hadn't done that, and that indicated vagus nerve disruption. So do all of your normal documentation and assessment. Really, truly understand that with botulism symptoms, with these adverse effects, in terms of rehab, it is a matter of waiting it out and encouraging the patient because this is really tough to go through. And a lot of people have days of where they just want to give up, truly. So
Hmm.
encouraging the patient, acknowledging what they're going through. So many people in my poll said, I said, what's one thing you would tell SLPs if you could? And like 10 out of 20 people said, please believe us. Like, please believe us. And that almost makes me cry because that's exactly how I felt when I was going through it. Like, please just someone acknowledge what I'm going through.
Well, and
Because
that's very much a trauma-informed response, is that you assume that every patient has experienced some sort of trauma, and your goal is to make a safe space. Your goal is to um, not re-traumatize the patient by saying, "Are you sure that's what really happened to you? Are you sure that's what you're?" Because
right.
that's so demeaning, but it's also not a trauma-informed response, and we can't assume that other medical things may or may not have happened to the same patient. So it's all very it's all very scary for the patient. And
It
I
is.
think, you having this experience and then, me having had other caregiver experiences has definitely changed the way that we practice because it can't not. If it doesn't, then I don't know
Absolutely.
how you can be a human and have this
Exactly.
experience and it not color what you do from day to day and the way that you respond to your patients because it's so crucial for us to take our own lived experience and say, oh my gosh, like I said earlier with the MBS, I didn't know the question to ask and I should have been asking that. But, when you don't know, it's not an excuse, but that wasn't something that we're taught, and it's not something that's in the mainstream that this could have been a functional dysphagia, but it could have been caused by this Botox injection that's so typical for, like you said, many things, not just cosmetic procedure, but
Mhm.
migraines. Our patients get it for vocal fold paralysis. They might get it for esophageal disorders.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
And in fact, 60% of Botox is used medically. So, and again, these are the patients that actually statistically are at a higher risk of developing adverse effects, just typically due to the volume of units that's involved. So
mhm.
they even more so need to be informed of these potential adverse effects and given all the information so that they can make that decision for themselves. We're not here to say, don't do it. Like I probably want to sometimes. I'm like, no. But that's not my decision to make. And obviously Botox helps a lot of people. I always have to say that because I get the naysayers that are like, but it helped me with blah blah. Of course, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying, please, look into the adverse effects. One more thing before I forget, if you do have a patient that's experiencing these, yeah, definitely report your suspicions to the injecting doctor, which is typically a neurologist, or their primary care doctor. I would give the patients like drugs.com as a resource. You can contact me. Like, I love hearing from other SLPs, and I have heard from a couple who saw my article in the ASHA Leader, all these different things, and they say, I have a patient with XYZ. What do you think's going on? I'm more than happy to share my experience. I've learned a ton about these adverse effects, and I also talk with, victims every day. So I know kind of what people are using, like all the oral dryness products, all the different things I use. So I am more than happy to help people out. It's really about energy conservation while we are waiting for the nervous system to recalibrate and regrow new nerve synapses so that it can resume, close to prior functioning, hopefully.
Yeah, so Heather's update. I was hospitalized last October with keratitis. The whole right side of my face started swelling, started having problems swallowing, so they admitted me. They put me on antibiotics for 4 days in the hospital. I mentioned the injections. No one seemed to think it was associated. They did complete blood panels, MRIs, nothing systemic or structural was indicated. I went to UCSF specialist and she too thought it was not associated at all. I go to the dentist and it comes back after the dentist. They think that it has to do with stress in the job. Well,
Okay, so so it looks like maybe she was receiving it for TMJ and she had swelling in her parotid glands. You can just it's
yeah.
hard because we can't talk to them, huh? But
Yeah, Heather,
swelling,
type whatever.
yeah, yeah, you can type more, Heather, but swelling is a very common adverse effect. We see it all the time. Some people get it in the lymph nodes, but others will get it
Mhm.
at the actual injection site. I
Yeah.
wonder what I would ask her if I was talking to Heather is what hold on, another question came in. Does she know what her problems swallowing were coming from? Was it muscle weakness? Was it dry mouth? Was it globus? I'd be curious to know, was she having trouble chewing? Because some people
Mm-hmm.
get so
Yeah.
fatigued, their chewing muscles get so weak that they are just on liquids because it's easier. And again,
Mm-hmm.
that goes back to energy conservation. I hope that, okay, that was last October. I hope she's doing better. Um, do we know, can I read one more question? Do we know what makes someone, oh, okay. Heather said,
Oh,
I must confess it's vanity. That's okay. We've been there.
it's okay.
30 years. I only get it around my chin, frown line. Yeah. I don't know. I personally, I feel like we know our bodies best, and I knew something had been wrong after the Botox. I just knew it. Now, again, I hadn't been receiving it for 30 years. So it's like, bam, Botox, my life changed. So that was a little bit more clear cut. For some
Mm-hmm.
women who have been receiving Botox for years and years, it is harder to connect the dots. If I were you, Heather, I'd stay away, but I only say that because I've seen I've seen this so often. This is in my support group on my podcast where women were having adverse effects and they weren't putting two and two together, or people told them, no, 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 it's not the Botox. So they went back and re-injected and it was way worse the next time. So I would just caution Heather, but feel free, Heather, to reach out to me too. I can give Renee my email address that people can reach out to me on.
Yeah, and then
Someone
we have
had a
another
question.
one. Do we know what
Oh,
makes someone be not so terribly damaged by the Russian roulette of Botox and another person gets so harmed? I have an aunt who's been getting Botox for spasmodic dysphonia for years. And I think we kind of touched on that, a lot of this is medical based
mhm.
procedures. And, I don't know. I would have to do way more research too. And Megan's probably, well, I
Well,
know
one,
you're far more, far more
yeah.
expertise in this than
Well, and
me.
and because I've spoken to so many people, and that's what I'm essentially been doing for the last 2 years is just like collecting data and putting it out on my website. I do blog posts, I do podcasts, I write books about all of this. What I would say is, luckily with spasmodic dysphonia, that is one of the injection sites. It's a very small amount of units,
Mm-hmm.
and it is done with imaging. So I
Yeah.
will say that that is probably a very low risk operation. Now, of course, if it goes wrong, scary stuff can happen because you could have, aspiration, right? If your vocal folds are too weak or paralyzed.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's one of those things where there's nothing inherent that makes someone more susceptible. This can happen with the most experienced MDs. It can happen with people who've been doing this for 30 years who never had a single side effect before, and all of a sudden they get one. So it is truly Russian roulette. I would say the less units you have, the less likely you are to suffer. But then again, I've seen people who had 5 units once and they're still suffering. And a lot of that has to do with a whole other condition that can happen to the body that's called MCAS. We don't have time to go into that, but it's on my website and people can always email me about it. But basically, think of it like this: if you get COVID or a mold exposure or any kind of toxic exposure, if the body wants to keep fighting it, you can end up
Mm-hmm.
in an autoimmune condition. So
Yeah.
that can happen after Botox exposure too. Um, so most people like me, their bodies will calm down after the exposure, but some people, it keeps ramping up those auto antibodies, and then you end up in an autoimmune like situation.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I had a
complex.
patient. I had a patient that had actually had a brainstem or midbrain stroke, and he wound up with spastic dysarthria, which is not, it's hard to treat. And referred him back to the ENT, and he went to a voice specialized otolaryngologist and wound up getting injected. And he was actively aspirating, but he never got sick. He never got
Oh,
aspiration pneumonia or anything like that. He just was because that it and it really didn't help him at all. He wound up opting not. And the ENT, the otolaryngologist, I'm trying not to call him ENTs anymore. He wound up. It was someone I know. This person he's referred to me and I've referred to him. He actually wound up saying to the patient, I don't want to do this again a second time because I don't think it's going to help you. I don't think this is beneficial for you. We tried it, it didn't work. But then I have another former patient who had a traumatic brain injury that resulted in unilateral vocal fold paralysis, who had Botox injected and did great, and it was
right.
perfect for
Yeah.
that patient. So it's really hard, I think, to tease out those pieces and who it's going to work for and who it's not. And I think that's
Right.
the part where you've been so clear about is that there we just don't know what the underlying, other than the volume, other than this happenstance of, is it something else that's
Right.
already occurring in the body that's already maybe an autoimmune thing that we don't know about.
Mhm.
There's a lot of unknowns, and so I think it's a really a great research-based place for our our neuro-based folks to look into and see, is there more to this than just the injection itself, the toxin itself?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it always comes down to, is the patient informed so that they can be on the lookout? Anyone receiving these injections should have a full page list of, here are the possible side effects. Please let your doctor know if you start experiencing a new onset, right? We're not talking about, oh, I've been dizzy on and off for 10 years. No, we're talking about new onsets of any of these symptoms, so that your doctor can do what that doctor did and say, you know what, I don't think these are going to work. Or maybe you're having some side effects that we don't want those to get worse. And now we have to make a risk benefit calculation and figure out maybe another intervention. Botox, it works so well. That's why it's so popular, right? But when it goes wrong, and what I learned is that it does go wrong a lot more than we're being told.
Yeah.
There's kind of this story of like, oh, let's not talk about this too much, or oh, well, they'll be fine in 3 months, so we don't have to worry about that. But that's just not really what's going on. And again, everyone can feel free to reach out to me directly. I love getting emails, especially from SLPs. I love educating on this topic, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions anyone had, because we couldn't get to everything. We could
No,
get we could keep going, Renee, but
we could do a part two, part three.
yeah.
But thank you so much, Megan. I thank you for entertaining me when I reached out to you, and I just
I'll
miss
put my
you
email in the
in
chat
the
real
chat.
quick. And it's a funny title because it's actually the title of my memoir, which was a very small memoir I wrote about my story, called Me Talks Pretty. I was trying to be funny. There's a book called Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris. And
Yeah,
so I wrote it, Me Talks Pretty. Website
yeah,
too. Yeah, that was the iatrogenic botulism. Thank you so much, Renee.
yeah. I think what's happening is you're sending it over to the host and panelists. So I'll put it in the chat to everybody.
Oh, am I? Oh, that's right. I'm texting the wrong people. Sorry,
Oh,
guys.
no, 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 you're fine. You're fine.
Mm.
But again, thank you so much, Megan. This was fantastic. I mean, not fantastic that this happened to you, but I just appreciate you being so willing to share your story, and the advocacy that you're doing is so important. So you're welcome to come back, and any research, anything you want to share with us on another episode. I'd love to talk to you again. And just remember, everybody that's joined us, if you need your live CEUs that your state license requires, make sure you complete all course modules, including the one that says complete course, before the end of the day on your Speech Therapy PD account. Thanks again, Megan. It was great to connect with you, and I hope to chat with you soon.
Sounds great. Have a great night.